She grabbed his collar in front of 300 people and pulled him toward her mouth. Victoria Reynolds, the billionaire nobody dared touch, was about to kiss a Navy officer she'd known for 4 hours, and the whole ballroom went silent to watch it happen. Then he did something no man had ever done to her. He stopped her. Gently. Firmly. He said one sentence that made her hands go cold, and in that moment, the most powerful woman in America realized she'd finally met someone she couldn't buy, break, or control. Before we go further, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight, so I can see how far this story travels. And if stories about honor still mean something to you, subscribe and stay with me to the end. The invitation had sat on Daniel Carter's kitchen counter for 2 weeks before he finally decided to go. He hadn't wanted to. A wedding meant a crowd, and a crowd meant questions, and questions meant strangers asking where his wife was. And Daniel had run out of gentle ways to say she's been gone 3 years now. But his old friend Marcus was the one getting married, and Marcus had stood beside Daniel at the funeral when half the world had melted away, so there wasn't really a choice. You show up for the men who show up for you. The Navy taught him that before it taught him anything else. So he ironed his dress uniform at 11 o'clock at night, checked on Lily one last time she was asleep, with her arm around a stuffed dolphin she'd named Admiral after him. And the next morning, he drove his daughter to his mother-in-law's house in North Charleston and knelt down on the porch to look her in the eye. "You be good for Grandma Ruth," he said. "I'm always good," Lily said. "You are mostly good." "Daddy." She put both little hands on his cheeks, the way her mother used to, and it stopped his heart every single time. "Are you gonna have fun?" Daniel had learned a long time ago that you don't lie to a 7-year-old. They can smell it. "I'm gonna try, baby." "Try harder than that," Lily said, and Ruth laughed from the doorway, and Daniel drove to that wedding with his daughter's voice in his ears. Try harder than that. He didn't know yet that he was about to. The wedding was in one of those old Charleston mansions south of Broad, the kind with wrought iron gates and live oaks dripping Spanish moss, the kind of place that cost more for one evening than Daniel made in 3 months. He handed his keys to a valet who looked at his uniform a beat too long, the way people did trying to figure out if he was somebody. He wasn't somebody. He was Lieutenant Commander Daniel Carter, 38 years old, a logistics officer who moved fuel and food and medicine across oceans so that other men could do the fighting. And he had made his peace with being nobody's idea of a hero a long time ago. He walked into the reception alone. Every man in that room had a woman on his arm. Every woman had a man. And Daniel Carter walked in carrying nothing but a photograph of a little girl folded into his wallet, and he found the bar, and he ordered a club soda with lime, because he was driving back to get his daughter in the morning, and he never drank when he had to be sharp for Lily. "Just a soda?" the bartender asked. "Just a soda," Daniel said. "Long night ahead of you. Every night's a long night, friend. But yeah." He turned around with his glass and surveyed the room the way he surveyed everything. Corners first, exits second, then the people. Old habit. You never fully leave the service. And that was when he saw her. She was standing near the tall windows on the far side of the ballroom, and she was the most alone person Daniel had ever seen in a room that full. He didn't know she was Victoria Reynolds. He didn't know she was worth $11 billion. He didn't know the men in that room were terrified of her, and the women envied her, and the entire financial press called her unstoppable. He just saw a woman in a dark green dress holding a champagne flute, like a shield, smiling at people with a smile that never once reached her eyes, and something in Daniel, the same something that woke him at 5 a.m. to pack his daughter's lunch. The same something that noticed when a young sailor under his command was drowning quietly, that something looked at her and thought, "She's hurting." He didn't go to her. That wasn't his way. A man doesn't walk up to a stranger because he's decided she needs saving. That's arrogance dressed up as kindness, and Daniel had no use for it. So he leaned against the bar and watched the wedding, and he waited, and he let the evening carry people to him the way it always did. It carried her about 40 minutes later. She came to the bar because she needed to escape a cluster of men in expensive suits who had cornered her near the dessert table, and Daniel heard the tail end of it as she pulled away, one of them saying, "Victoria, just 15 minutes of your time. My fund is doing incredible things in," and her cutting him off with a flat, bloodless "email my office." She reached the bar. She set down her empty flute. She said another to the bartender, and then she noticed the man standing 3 feet away in a Navy uniform, and she braced herself. Daniel could see her brace. He'd seen soldiers brace like that before walking into a room full of people who wanted a piece of them. She waited for him to want something. He said, "Rough crowd tonight." Victoria blinked. "Excuse me. Those fellas by the desserts. They had you surrounded like a wolf pack. I figured you came over here to get some air." He lifted his glass an inch. "You want me to pretend we're having a fascinating conversation, so they leave you alone? I can do that. I'm told I'm very boring." For a second, just a second, the corner of her mouth twitched. Then the wall came back up. "And what do you want? Right now, I want them to open the shrimp station. It's been 40 minutes and I can see it from here, and it is taunting me." Victoria stared at him. She was so used to the game, the flattery, the angle, the ask hiding behind the compliment, that a man talking about shrimp genuinely disarmed her. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was almost a hope. "Should I?" "Most people do." "Well," Daniel said, "I've been on a submarine tender in the Persian Gulf for a good chunk of the last few years, so I'm a little behind on who I'm supposed to know." "Are you famous?" "Something like that." "Movie star?" "No." "Politician?" "God, no." "Good. I don't trust those." He held out his hand. "Daniel Carter." She looked at his hand for a moment, the way you look at something you've forgotten how to use. Then she shook it. Her grip was firm, a businesswoman's grip, a grip that had closed 1,000 deals, but her fingers were cold. "Victoria," she said, and left off her last name on purpose, testing him. "Nice to meet you, Victoria." He didn't ask for the last name. He didn't chase it. He just went back to watching the shrimp station, and something in Victoria Reynolds, something she would spend the next several months trying to understand, leaned toward him without her permission. "You're really not going to ask," she said a minute later. "Ask what?" "Anything. Who I am. What I do. Why I'm here alone." Daniel considered that. "I figured if you wanted me to know you'd tell me, and if you don't, then it's none of my business and I've got a rule about people's business." He took a sip. "You want the rule?" "Sure. If a person wants to be found, they leave the door open. If they want to be left alone, they close it. Your door's been closed since I walked in." He looked at her plainly, without judgment. "I'm not going to knock on a closed door, ma'am. That's just rude." Victoria set down her champagne. She had not touched it. "You called me ma'am. You'd prefer something else." "No, I just—" She stopped. She was 34 years old and worth $11 billion, and she was standing at a wedding trying to remember the last time a man had spoken to her like she was a person and not a lottery ticket. "Nobody's called me ma'am in a very long time. Where I'm from, it's just manners." "And where's that?" "Small town outside Beaufort. My daddy fixed boats. My mama taught 3rd grade for 31 years and could stop a room full of 8-year-olds with one look. I joined the Navy at 18 because it was that or the shrimp boats, and I get seasick." He smiled, and it was a real smile, easy and unguarded, and Victoria realized she was staring at it. "So the Navy it was. You get seasick in the Navy. For the first 2 years, ma'am, I was the most reliable source of chum on the eastern seaboard." And Victoria Reynolds laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it. A real laugh, sharp and surprised, a laugh she hadn't used in so long. It felt like finding money in an old coat. 2 men across the room turned to look, because Victoria Reynolds laughing at a wedding was roughly as common as a solar eclipse. She caught herself and pressed her lips together, and Daniel watched all of it, and he thought, "There she is. There's the person under all that armor." "I'm sorry," she said, composing herself. That was the first honest thing you've done all night," Daniel said. "Don't apologize for it." That was the sentence that undid her. Victoria Reynolds had built an empire on reading people. She could look at a boardroom and know within 90 seconds who was lying, who was scared, who would fold, who would fight. She had turned a bankrupt startup into one of the largest technology firms in the country by understanding exactly what everyone around her wanted and using it. And in all those years, the deals, the betrayals, the man she'd been engaged to, who'd walked out the door the week her company nearly collapsed, and married someone easier 6 months later. In all those years, not one single person had looked at her and seen the person under all that armor. They saw the money. They saw the title. They saw a woman they wanted to be near so that some of it might rub off. This man saw that she was pretending to enjoy a party, and he'd said it out loud, and it hadn't been an insult. It had been a hand extended in the dark. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "You can ask me anything. Doesn't mean I'll answer." "Fair." She turned so she was facing him fully, now her back to the room to the wolves. "Are you actually enjoying this wedding? Or are you just pretending like everyone else?" Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "I'm not enjoying it. I'm here because the groom carried a casket for me 3 years ago, and you show up for a man like that. But I'd rather be home right now. My daughter's asleep at her grandmother's, and I'd give anything to be sitting on the floor of her room listening to her breathe." He wasn't performing sorrow. He was just telling the truth the way he told Lily the truth. "So no, ma'am, I'm not enjoying it. But I'm glad I came. Those two things can both be real." Victoria was quiet. "You have a daughter," she said. "I do. Lily. She's 7. He reached into his jacket, and for a second Victoria expected a phone. Everyone showed you a phone. But instead, he took out his wallet, and from behind his ID, he slid out an actual photograph, printed on actual paper, worn soft at the corners from being handled. He held it up. "That's her." Victoria looked. A little girl with gap teeth and wild dark hair, holding up a starfish on a beach, grinning like she'd invented joy. "She's beautiful," Victoria said, and meant it. "She's the whole thing," Daniel said quietly. "She's the whole reason for all of it." He slid the photo back where it belonged, right behind his heart, and Victoria noticed he touched it with his thumb before he closed the wallet, a small unconscious gesture, the way you might touch a door frame, leaving a house you love. "And her mother?" Victoria asked before she could stop herself. Daniel didn't flinch. He'd been asked before. "She passed 3 years ago. Car accident. Icy rode a truck that didn't stop." He said it plainly. "It was fast. That's the only mercy in it. It was fast." "I'm so sorry." "Thank you." And here was the thing that Victoria would remember for a long time. He didn't turn it into a performance of grief, and he didn't wave it off either. He just let it be true. And then he said, "For a long time after I thought my only job was to keep Lily safe. Keep her fed, keep her in school, keep her from breaking. Survive it. And I did that. But somewhere in there, a friend of mine, another widower, he said something to me I think about every day." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Danny, your little girl doesn't need a father who's just surviving. She needs a father who's actually living.'" Daniel turned his glass slowly in his hand. "And I'm still working on that part. The living part. It's harder than the surviving part. Surviving, you just put your head down and go. Living asks more of you." Across the ballroom, the band shifted into something slow, and couples drifted onto the dance floor, and neither Daniel nor Victoria moved toward it. They stayed at the bar, two people who had walked in alone, and the conversation kept going the way water finds the low places naturally, without either of them steering it. "Can I tell you something strange?" Victoria said. "Please. I have 1,100 employees. I don't even know how many followers, millions. I get invited to everything. And I have not had a conversation like this in—" She stopped and did the math, and the answer frightened her. "In years. Years, Daniel. Do you understand how insane that sounds? I am surrounded by people all day, every day, and I have not had one honest conversation in years. I understand it more than you'd think. How could you possibly?" "Because I'm surrounded too," Daniel said. "Different way. You've got boardrooms. I've got a base full of sailors, a PTA, a whole town that knew my wife. And everybody's kind. Everybody means well, but everybody's careful with me. You know, they handle me. They talk to me like I might crack. And you spend enough time being handled, and you start to forget what it feels like to just talk. To just be a man talking to a woman at a bar about shrimp." He smiled. "So no, ma'am, you're not insane. You're just tired. There's a difference, and people mix them up all the time." Victoria stared at him. "Who are you?" she said. And this time it wasn't the practiced question of a CEO sizing up an asset. It was something younger, more naked, almost afraid. Who are you, and why do you already know me better than the people I pay to know me? I told you, Daniel Carter, Beaufort, seasick. He raised his glass. Not that interesting. You're lying. I never lie, ma'am. Ask my daughter. She'll tell you it's my worst quality. It was somewhere around then that the first man came. He was tall, silver at the temples, a watch on his wrist that cost more than Daniel's truck, and he cut between them without so much as a glance at the uniformed officer standing there as if Daniel were a coat rack. Victoria, he said warmly, all teeth. I was hoping I'd catch you. Listen about the Halbert acquisition. I know your people said the window was closed, but if you and I could just... Charles. Grab 5 minutes. I really think there's a version of this where everybody... Charles. Victoria's voice dropped 10 degrees, and Daniel watched fascinated as the warm, tired woman he'd been talking to vanished, and something cold and armored slid into her place, seamless as a blade going back into a sheath. It's a wedding. I'm not doing business at a wedding. Call Raina Monday. Of course, I just thought, Monday, Charles. The man's smile flickered. He glanced finally at Daniel, a quick appraising look filing him as unimportant, and then he retreated. And Victoria let out a breath, and the armor came off again, and she looked suddenly exhausted, decades older than 34. That, she said, is my entire life. That man right there. That's every conversation I have. He wanted something from you. They all want something from me, every single one. She wasn't angry when she said it. That was the worst part, Daniel thought. She wasn't angry. She'd gone past angry a long time ago, out the other side into a kind of flat resignation that was much harder to watch. Do you know what it does to you? To know that every person who smiles at you is running a calculation, to never once be sure if someone likes you or likes what you can do for them. She laughed, but it was bitter now. Nothing like the real laugh from before. It makes you stop wondering. It makes you just assume. Everyone's Charles, everyone. Until proven otherwise. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You want to know what I want from you, he said. Victoria's jaw tightened because here it came. Here was the ask they always got there eventually. Sure, she said, already armored again. Tell me. Nothing, Daniel said. She looked at him. I don't want anything from you, ma'am. I don't have a fund. I don't have a pitch. I don't want an investment or an introduction or a photo or a favor. I've got a truck that needs new brakes and a daughter who needs new shoes because she keeps growing, and neither of those problems has anything to do with you. In about 10 hours, I'm going to drive back to Beaufort, and I'm going to pick up my little girl, and I'm probably never going to see you again. He said it kindly, without an ounce of angle in it. So you don't have to do the calculation with me. I already told you the answer. It's nothing. You can just put it down for a minute. The armor, if you want to. I'm not going to take anything while it's off. Chapter 5. Victoria Reynolds had been called cold. She had been called ruthless. A magazine had once put her on the cover under the word ice. She had heard every insult a powerful woman hears, and she had built a fortress where none of it could reach her, and she had lived in that fortress so long she'd forgotten there was ever anything else. And a Navy logistics officer with new brakes to buy had just in the middle of a wedding gently told her she was allowed to put it down. Her eyes stung. She turned toward the window so he wouldn't see. She was furious at herself. You do not cry. You have never cried in public. Crying is what they wait for. Crying is blood in the water. And she blinked hard and got it under control. And when she turned back, her voice was steady. You should be careful, Daniel Carter, she said, and she was trying to make it sound light, but it came out cracked at the edges. Say things like that to a woman like me, and she might start to think you're real. I am real, ma'am. That's the problem. The band played on. Somewhere behind them, Marcus was dancing with his new wife, and the guests were laughing, and the money moved through the room like a current. And none of them noticed the two people at the bar, the widower and the billionaire standing in a small pocket of honesty they had accidentally built together. Both of them a little afraid of it, neither of them willing to walk away. Tell me about her, Victoria said suddenly. About who? Lily. Tell me about Lily. Tell me a real thing. Something small. Something you wouldn't tell Charles. She almost smiled. "I want to know what it sounds like when you talk about someone you love. I don't think I remember." And so Daniel told her. He told her about the first morning after the funeral, when he'd stood in front of Lily's dresser at 4 a.m., with no idea how to do a 4-year-old's hair, and how he'd pulled up a video on his phone and taught himself to braid on the fringe of a bath towel over and over his big clumsy hands, failing at it for an hour until they didn't. He told her how Lily had come downstairs and let him braid it and looked in the mirror and said, "It's crooked, Daddy," and he'd said, "I know, baby, I'm sorry," and she'd thought about it and said, "That's okay, I like it crooked, it's ours." He told her how he still, 3 years later, packs a lunch at 5 in the morning and cuts the sandwich diagonally, because Lily insists it tastes better as triangles, and how he knows that's not true, and how he does it anyway, every single day, because the not true things you do for your children are sometimes the truest things you'll ever do. He told her that Lily had recently informed him she was going to be a marine biologist, and that she'd named her stuffed dolphin Admiral after him, and that when he'd asked why, she'd said, "Because an admiral is the one who's in charge of the whole ocean, and you're in charge of my whole ocean." And when he finished, he looked over, and Victoria Reynolds, worth $11 billion, feared across 2 continents, the woman the press called Ice, had tears running openly down her face, and she wasn't even trying to hide them anymore. "That's it," she whispered. That's what it sounds like. That's what I forgot." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, mascara be damned, and she laughed at herself, wet and broken and real. "God, look at me. I don't do this. I don't cry at weddings. I don't cry in front of strangers. I have a reputation. Do you understand? I have people who would put this on the internet in a heartbeat." "There's nobody here but me," Daniel said. "And I'm not going to tell anybody anything. That's a promise. I keep my promises, ma'am. It's about the only thing I've got left to give, but I give it good." "Did you?" She looked at him, then really looked, the way you look at a person once in a very long while, as if you're trying to memorize them, as if you already know that whatever this is, you're not going to get much of it, and you'd better take down every detail while it lasts. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. And it was the most honest question of the entire night from the most guarded person in the room. "You don't want anything. You said so. You're never going to see me again. So there's no reason. There's no angle. Kindness always has an angle, Daniel. I've spent 34 years learning that." "So why?" Daniel Carter set down his glass. "Because somebody looked kind at me once when I was drowning, and didn't need to," he said. "In the worst month of my life, when I couldn't stand up straight, a man I barely knew sat with me every night for 2 weeks and asked for nothing. Just sat there. And it kept me alive. I mean that plainly. It kept me alive." He looked at her steady as a lighthouse. "So now I do it too. When I see somebody drowning, I sit with them. Doesn't matter if they've got $11 or 11 billion. Drowning's drowning. And I've been watching you drown in this room for 2 hours, ma'am, in that pretty green dress surrounded by 300 people all alone." He shrugged gently. "That's the whole angle. There isn't any more to it than that." For a long moment, Victoria Reynolds didn't say anything at all. Then she reached out slowly, carefully, the way you approach something wild that might bolt, and she put her cold hand over his warm one on the bar, and she left it there. "Stay a little longer," she said. "Please, don't drive back yet. Just stay a little longer and talk to me. I know I don't have any right to ask. I know you have a daughter and a truck with bad brakes and a whole real life. But I have been alone for a very long time, Daniel Carter, and you are the first person in years who made me forget it, and I am not ready for the forgetting to end." Daniel looked down at her hand on his, and he thought about Lily, asleep with her arm around a dolphin named Admiral. He thought about the drive home. He thought about how a man in his position, a man with nothing talking to a woman with everything, had no business standing this close to a fire like this one, and how the smart thing, the safe thing, the sensible thing was to finish his soda and shake her hand and wish her well and walk out into the Charleston night and never think of her again. He thought about all of that, and then he heard his daughter's voice clear as a bell from that morning on the porch. "Try harder than that." "All right," Daniel Carter said. "I'll stay a little longer." He didn't know it yet. Neither of them did, but the woman whose hand was resting on his had already started drinking more than she should, to quiet the thing his kindness had woken up in her. He didn't know that in a few short hours, out on a balcony over the dark water, with the champagne loosening every wall she had. Victoria Reynolds was going to do something reckless and human and desperate. He didn't know she was going to reach for him like a drowning person reaches for the last solid thing in the world. And he didn't know that when she did the answer, he gave her quiet and steady and completely unshakable was going to be the moment that decided the rest of both their lives. He only knew that his daughter had told him to try harder. So he stayed. He stayed, and for a while it was easy. They moved from the bar to a small round table near the back of the ballroom, the kind nobody wanted, because it was far from the action, and that was exactly why Daniel chose it. He pulled out her chair without thinking about it the way his mother had trained into him before he could tie his own shoes, and Victoria stopped halfway into the seat and looked at him. "You did that on purpose," she said. "Did what?" "Pulled out my chair." "I did it on accident, ma'am. Which is worse if you think about it. Means I can't help it." He sat down across from her. "My mama would come back from the grave and box my ears if I let a lady seat herself. I've had men open doors for me because they wanted something. I've never had one do it because a dead woman would haunt him." "Well, you've been running with the wrong crowd." She laughed again, and this time it didn't surprise her as much. That was the thing she noticed. The second laugh came easier than the first. Like a door that had rusted shut, and he'd forced it once, and now it was starting to swing. A waiter drifted past with a tray of champagne, and Victoria lifted 2 flutes off it before Daniel could say anything, and she set one in front of him. "I don't drink, ma'am. Not tonight. I told you I've got the drive." "Then it's decoration," Victoria said. "Everybody at these things holds a glass. It's camouflage. You stand around with an empty hand, people think you're available, and they descend." She turned her own flute slowly by the stem. "This one's my I've lost count, which is not like me. I don't lose count. I count everything." She took a long sip. "That's what you do to a person, apparently. Make them lose count." Daniel slid his glass a few inches away toward the center of the table, out of his own reach. He didn't make a thing of it, but he did it where she could see. "You're watching how much I drink," Victoria said. "I'm watching you, ma'am. The drinking's part of it. Doesn't mean I'm judging it, just means I notice." "And what do you notice?" "I notice you started slow when I first saw you, and you've picked up speed in the last hour, and it started right about the time you told me nobody's had an honest conversation with you in years." Daniel folded his hands on the table. "In my experience, people don't pour something into a glass to feel more. They pour it in to feel less. So I'm wondering what it is you're trying to turn down tonight." Victoria stared at him over the rim of her flute. "You're a logistics officer," she said slowly. "You move fuel, boxes, supplies." "I do." "Then how in God's name do you read people like that?" "Because moving boxes is easy," Daniel said. "It's the men who move them that'll break your heart. You want to keep a supply chain running across an ocean, you learn real fast that the whole thing lives or dies on people. The 19-year-old kid who didn't sleep because he got a letter from home. The chief who's been drinking on the sly for a month and nobody caught it. The officer who's cracking under something he won't name." He shrugged. "You learn to read the small things. The way a man holds his coffee. Whether he laughs a half-second late. How fast the glass empties." He looked at hers. "It's the same skill, ma'am. Cargo and grief. You'd be surprised." She set the champagne down. She didn't finish it. Some part of her, small and stubborn, didn't want him to add it to the count. "Tell me about your wife," she said. The request landed soft in the noisy room, and Daniel went still. "I don't usually," he said. "I know. That's why I'm asking. I want the thing you don't usually give." She leaned forward, elbows on the table. The CEO polish entirely gone now. Just a tired woman in a green dress asking for something true. "You gave me Lily. You gave me the braid and the triangle sandwich. But you skated past her. And I've spent a career watching where people don't want you to look. So." Her voice gentled. "Tell me about your wife, Daniel." For a long moment, he didn't. He turned his club soda in a slow circle on the tablecloth, and the condensation left a ring, and he stared at the ring like it was a photograph. "Her name was Sarah," he said finally. Sarah Ann. She was a nurse. Pediatric ICU. The sickest little kids in the hospital. The ones other nurses couldn't take because you'd lose one every so often and it would gut you. She could take it. Not because it didn't hurt her, Because it hurt her right. You know what I mean? Some people go numb to protect themselves. Sarah went the other way. She let every one of those kids all the way in, and she cried in the car after the bad ones, and then she got up the next morning and did it again. He shook his head slowly. I used to ask her how she did it. She'd say, "Danny, somebody's got to be the one who isn't scared in the room. The parents can't be. The kid can't be. So it's me. I'll be scared later in the parking lot. In the room, I'm the calm one." She sounds extraordinary. She was ordinary, Daniel said. That's what killed me about losing her. She wasn't a saint. She wasn't a she left cabinet doors open. She was always late. She couldn't parallel park to save her life. She sang in the shower, and she was terrible, just criminally bad, and I'd give the rest of my life to hear it one more time. His jaw worked. People want you to say your dead wife was an angel. She wasn't an angel. She was a woman. A real, whole, flawed, funny woman, and that's 1,000 times harder to lose than an angel. You can put an angel on a shelf. You can't shelve a woman who sang bad in the shower. Victoria didn't say anything. She'd learned tonight from him that some things you just let be true. The night it happened. Daniel went on quieter. She'd gone to pick up cake mix. That's it. That's the whole thing. Lily wanted to make cupcakes the next day, and we were out of the mix, and Sarah said she'd run to the store, and I said I'd go. And she said no, stay. Lily's almost asleep. Read her the dinosaur book. I'll be 20 minutes. He stopped. I said okay. That was the last conversation. I'll be 20 minutes. Okay. 4 years. I'd been telling that woman I loved her every time she walked out a door, every single time it was our thing, and the one time it mattered, the one time it was the last time I said okay, and went back to a book about a triceratops. Daniel, I'm not telling you this for sympathy, ma'am. I want to be clear about that. He looked up and his eyes were wet, but his voice was steady, the voice of a man who'd carried this so long, he'd learned to walk under the weight without staggering. I'm telling you, because you asked what I'm trying to turn down when I'm tempted to drink. And the answer is that, the okay. That's the thing at the bottom of the glass for me. So when I watch you pouring, I'm not judging. I'm recognizing. That's all. Takes one to know one. The band had gone quiet between songs, and in the small silence, Victoria reached across the table and took his hand again. Not romantic, not this time, just two people who'd each found the bottom of the same well. I've never told anyone this, she said. You don't have to. No, you gave me Sarah. It's only fair. She took a breath. There was a man, Robert. We were engaged. This was God 7 years ago, back when the company was nothing, back when I was nothing. Just a woman with an idea and a mountain of debt and 18-hour days. And Robert was there for the 18-hour days. He'd bring me dinner at the office at midnight. He believed in me when there was nothing to believe in. I really thought this is the one who sees me. Not the money, because there wasn't any. Just me. What happened? The company almost died. There was a quarter, I won't bore you with the details, where we came within about 9 days of bankruptcy. I had to lay off 40 people I'd hired myself. I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. I lost 12 pounds. I was standing on the edge of losing everything I'd built. And I went home one night, the worst night, and I needed him. I needed one person in the whole world to hold me and say it's going to be okay. Her voice didn't shake. That was somehow worse. And he was packing a bag. He said he actually said this, Daniel, I have it memorized. He said I fell in love with a woman who was going somewhere. I didn't sign up for a sinking ship. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. He left that night, married someone else 14 months later. A very nice, very simple woman who was never going anywhere and therefore could never sink. Victoria laughed, and it was the bitter laugh, the ice laugh. And here's the part that I've never said out loud to a single living soul. The company survived. We turned it around. Within 3 years, I was worth more than his entire family had made in a century. And do you know what I felt? When the money came, when I was finally safe. Tell me. Nothing, she whispered. I felt nothing, because the money didn't come to me. It came to the woman he left. It proved him right. He said he wanted a woman who was going somewhere, and I became the woman who went the furthest of anyone, and all it did was teach me that if I ever sink again, if I'm ever weak again, ever small again, ever need anyone again, they will pack a bag. Her eyes were bright and terrible. So I decided I would never need anyone again. I made it a policy. I run my whole life on it. Need nothing, and no one can leave you. It's very efficient. She smiled, and it broke his heart. It's the loneliest efficient thing in the world.
Chabir.
They sat with that for a while, her hand in his, and neither of them noticed the wedding going on around them, the toasts and the cake and the drunk uncle attempting the electric slide. They were somewhere else entirely in a smaller and truer room they'd built out of 2 confessions. "Can I say something?" Daniel said. "And you promise not to put your armor back on." "I can't promise that." "Try." She swallowed. "Fine, try." "Robert wasn't the strong one for leaving," Daniel said. "I know it feels like he was. I know it feels like he saw the sinking ship and did the smart thing, and you were the fool for going down with it. That's the story you've told yourself for 7 years, isn't it? That love is for suckers, and he was too smart to be a sucker." He shook his head slowly. "But that's backward, ma'am. A man who leaves when it gets hard isn't strong. He's just faster than everybody else at running away. That's not strength. That's a head start on cowardice." Victoria's eyes filled. "The strong ones," Daniel said, "are the ones who stay when the ship's going down. Not because they're stupid. Because they decided that the person is worth more than the water." Sarah ran toward the sick kids everybody else ran from. "That's strength. Your Robert ran the other way, and then he had the nerve to call it being smart." Daniel leaned in. "You didn't lose a strong man, Victoria. You lost a fast one. There's a world of difference, and I think you've had it turned around for 7 years, and I think it's been eating you alive." She pressed her free hand flat against her mouth. For a second, Daniel thought she was going to lose it right there in the ballroom, and he started to say, "We can step outside," but she got it under control, the way she'd gotten everything under control for 34 years, and when she took her hand away, her voice was almost level. "You are a very dangerous man, Daniel Carter." "I keep hearing that. I move boxes, ma'am." "You move something," she said. "It isn't boxes." The reception was thinning out. The older guests had gone, and the drunk uncle had been poured into a cab, and the music had softened into the slow late-night songs that mean a party's winding down. Marcus found them at the back table, flushed and happy and married, and clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "There he is, Danny Carter in the flesh. Man, I wasn't sure you'd come." He looked between Daniel and Victoria, and something registered on his face, some flicker of weight. "Do you two know?" And then he was too happy and too drunk to chase it. "You having a good time? You need anything?" "I'm good, brother." "Beautiful wedding. She's way out of your league. Don't I know it?" Marcus grinned. Then his face went soft and serious for a second, the way drunk men get. "Hey, I'm real glad you came, Danny. After everything. I think about her, you know. Sarah, all the time. She'd want you here. She'd want you—" He gestured vaguely at the room, the lights, the life of it, out, in it, not just— "I know," Daniel said quietly. "I know she would, she." Marcus squeezed his shoulder once more and wove off toward his bride. And when Daniel turned back, Victoria was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "He knew your wife. Everybody knew Sarah, small town. And he said she'd want you out, in it." Victoria tilted her head. "In what exactly?" "Life, I suppose." "Is that why you stayed tonight, when I asked?" There was something careful in her voice now, something testing. "Because your dead wife's best friend thinks you should get out." "Am I a project?" "A step in someone's grief recovery plan." And Daniel understood in that moment exactly what she was doing. She was reaching for the armor. She'd let too much out, said too much, needed too much, and now the old policy was screaming at her. Need nothing and no one can leave you, and she was trying to turn him into a Charles before he could turn into a Robert. Make it small, make it strategic, make it something she could file and dismiss. Beat the abandonment to the punch by deciding first that it was never real. He'd seen sailors do the same thing 100 ways. Pick a fight before shore leave ends, so the goodbye hurts less. Break the thing yourself, so nobody can break it for you. "No, ma'am," Daniel said gently. "You're not a project." "You don't have to. Let me finish. You're not a project. I don't have a plan for you. I didn't come here tonight to get out. I came here to bury an evening for a friend and go home. And then I saw a woman drowning in a green dress, and I sat down same as I'd sit with anybody. That's the whole truth. He held her eyes. But I'll tell you what you are since you're fishing. You're the first person in 3 years who made me forget to check the time. You want to know how I know I haven't looked at my watch once? And I look at my watch every 4 minutes of my life, because there's always a lunch to pack, or a drop-off to make, or a duty roster to sign, and for 2 hours I forgot all of it. You did that. He let go of her hand, sat back. So no, you're not a step in a plan. If anything, ma'am, I think you're the thing the plan was trying to keep me safe from. Victoria's careful expression cracked straight down the middle. Don't say things like that, she whispered. You keep telling me not to say things, and then you keep asking me questions that only have those answers, because I don't know how to do this. Her voice rose just slightly ragged at the edges, and she caught it, brought it back down. I don't, Daniel. I run a company. I know how to do that. I know how to read a balance sheet and fire a division and win a hostile board, and I cannot do whatever this is. I don't have a policy for this. I don't have a framework. She laughed, wet and helpless. Listen to me, a framework. For a feeling. God, I'm broken. I'm actually broken. Robert broke something in me, and I never fixed it. I just built a company on top of the hole and called it a foundation. You're not broken. You don't know that. I know that a broken thing can't feel this much, Daniel said. Numb, maybe. Broken, no. Broken people don't cry at a stranger's story about a triangle sandwich. You're not broken, Victoria. You're guarded. Those are different. Broken can't be fixed. Guarded just needs a reason to open the gate. He softened. And I'm not asking you to open it tonight. I'm not asking you to open it ever. I just want you to know it's a gate, not a wall. There's a difference. And I think somebody convinced you a long time ago it was a wall. And I think that's the loneliest lie anybody ever told you. That was the moment it turned. Not into romance exactly, into something more dangerous than romance, into possibility. And Victoria Reynolds, who had spent 7 years making very sure she never felt possibility again, reached for the nearest champagne flute on a passing tray and drank half of it in one go. Daniel watched her do it. He didn't say anything this time. He understood what it was. It was a woman trying to drown a thing that had just surfaced, and she was going to lose that fight, and part of her knew it, and that scared her more than anything. I should get you some water, he said. I don't want water. You've had a lot, ma'am, and you're feeling a lot on top of it. Those two things together, I said I don't want water, Daniel. It came out sharp, the boardroom voice, the email, my office voice, and then she heard herself, and her face fell. I'm sorry. I don't talk to you like that. I don't want to talk to you like that. I talk to everyone like that, and I don't want to talk to you like that. She pressed her fingers to her temple. See, broken. Guarded, Daniel corrected. But he was already up, already flagging a waiter, and he came back a moment later with a tall glass of ice water and set it in front of her, and he didn't say anything else about it. He just put it there. The way you leave a light on for someone. No lecture. Just an option. And after a moment, a long moment, a fight she had with herself, right there at the table. Victoria picked up the water instead of the champagne and drank it. And Daniel felt something in his chest ease that he hadn't known was clenched. There's a balcony, Victoria said, setting down the empty water glass. Off the side of the ballroom, overlooks the harbor. I saw it earlier when I was hiding from Charles. She stood a little unsteady and put a hand on the table to catch herself, and Daniel was up instantly with a hand under her elbow. I want air. I want to not be in a room full of people who want things. Come stand on the balcony with me, Daniel Carter. Just for a few minutes. And then I promise I'll let you drive home to your daughter and your bad breaks, and I'll go back to being ice, and this'll just be a strange, beautiful thing that happened once at a wedding. Daniel hesitated. Everything in him, every hard-earned instinct, every year of learning to read the small things was lighting up at once. She'd had too much to drink. She was feeling too much. The thing between them was pulled tight as a tripwire, and a man with any sense at all knew that a beautiful, lonely, half-drunk woman on a dark balcony over the water at the end of a night like this was not a situation you walked into if you cared about doing right by her. And he did care. That was the whole trouble. He cared already more than he had any business caring after 4 hours. Ma'am, don't ma'am me into a corner. I know that voice. That's the I'm about to be sensible voice. She almost smiled. Just air. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not God. I'm not propositioning you. Daniel, I've never propositioned anyone in my life. I wouldn't know how. I just don't want the night to end in a room. I want it to end somewhere I can breathe. Her eyes were huge and dark and honest. Please, 10 minutes, then you go. And Daniel Carter, who knew better, looked at this woman who had told him she'd built a company on top of a hole and called it a foundation, and he could not make himself say no to 10 minutes of air. 10 minutes, he said. Then I drive. 10 minutes, then you drive. The balcony was empty. Everyone else was inside where the music and the warmth were, and out here it was just the two of them, and the black water of the harbor, and the lights of the boats bobbing far out, and the air was cool and salt-heavy, and Victoria breathed it in like she'd been underwater. God, that's better, she said. She set both hands on the stone railing and leaned into it. You can't breathe in there. All those people. All that wanting. She turned her head to look at him. You know what the worst part of being me is? It isn't the loneliness even. It's that I can't ever tell. Every kindness, every smile, every man who says something nice, I have to run it through the machine. What do they want? What's the angle? What's the play? Every single time. For years. And the machine never turns off. It's on right now. It's been on all night. Even with me, especially with you. She turned to face him fully, her back to the railing, the harbor lights behind her. Because you're the first one it can't solve. I keep feeding you into it. What does he want? What's his angle? And it keeps coming back with nothing. And a machine that's run your whole life and keeps you safe and suddenly comes back with nothing, Daniel. That's not relief. That's terror. That's the most frightened I've been in 7 years. Because if the machine is wrong about you, then maybe it's been wrong about... She stopped. About what? About everything, she whispered. About needing people. About the gate being a wall. About whether I'm broken or just guarded. Guarded. She laughed and it cracked. You and your word. The wind came up off the water and she shivered, and without a thought, Daniel shrugged off his uniform jacket and settled it over her shoulders, and she went still under it and looked up at him, and there was a moment. He felt it happen, felt the air change where the whole night gathered itself and pointed at one single point in space between them. You did it again, she said softly. Did what? A kind thing, without an angle, the jacket. She pulled it closer around herself. It still smells like I don't know. Cedar. And something. You. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet and shining, and the champagne was in them, and so was 7 years of a locked gate, and she said very quietly, You make me feel like I'm not broken, Daniel. You're not. You make me feel like maybe the machine was wrong. It was. You make me feel like maybe I could need someone again, and they wouldn't pack a bag. Victoria. I don't want the night to end, she whispered, and she stepped in closer than she'd been all night, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her through his own jacket, and her face tilted up toward his, and her hand came up and gathered the front of his shirt in her fist. And there were 300 people on the other side of the glass doors, and not one of them was watching, and it was just the two of them, and the dark water, and she pulled him toward her mouth. And for 1/2 of 1 second, Daniel Carter felt every lonely night of the last 3 years rise up in him and answer yes. He was a man. She was beautiful and warm, and she smelled like champagne and salt, and she was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a drowning world. And God help him, he wanted to. Some starved and buried part of him that had been packing triangle sandwiches and braiding crooked hair and saying okay to a closing door for 3 years wanted badly to lean down into that warmth and let it swallow him whole. And then he saw it. He saw the count. He saw the champagne. He'd watched her drink the flutes lifted off the passing trays, the I've lost count, which is not like me. He saw the water glass she'd only picked up because he set it in front of her. He saw a woman who'd told him an hour ago that she couldn't tell the difference between real kindness and a play that the machine never turned off, that she was the most frightened she'd been in 7 years. He saw a woman who was not in this moment entirely herself, who was reaching for him the way a drowning person reaches not because they've chosen the thing they're grabbing, but because it's there and they're going under and any solid thing will do. And Daniel thought, if I do this now, I will never know if she meant it. And worse, she'll never know if she meant it. And tomorrow, when the champagne's gone and the harbor's just water and I'm 300 miles away being nobody again, she'll wake up and run it through the machine, and the machine will tell her exactly what it always tells her. That it was a play, that I took something, that she was weak and someone took advantage same as always. And it'll close the gate for good, and it'll be my fault. Her mouth was an inch from his. Her fist was tight in his shirt. Her eyes were closing. And Daniel Carter, who had wanted her, who was a man who had every reason and every temptation, and not one single person watching, who would ever have known, brought his hand up gently and pressed it flat against her collarbone, over the lapel of his own jacket, and he stopped her. Softly, but completely. He stepped back, and the space he opened up between them, 6 inches of cold salt air, was the loudest thing that had happened all night. Victoria's eyes flew open. For a second she didn't understand. Her fist was still curled in his shirt, holding nothing, now holding air where he'd been. "What?" she said. "Not like this," Daniel said quietly. And the woman who had never in her life been told no by anyone, not by a boardroom, not by a market, not by a man, stood on that dark balcony with his jacket on her shoulders and his handprint fading from her skin, and looked at him like the ground had opened under her feet. "You don't—" Her voice failed. She tried again, and it came out small and stunned and terribly, terribly young. "You don't want me." And Daniel Carter looked at this brilliant, guarded, drowning woman, and he understood that the next thing out of his mouth was going to matter more than almost anything he'd ever said in his life. So he took a breath. And he told her the truth. "That's not the problem," Daniel said. Victoria stared at him. His jacket was still on her shoulders. Her hand had dropped to her side, empty. "Then what—" "Look at me." He didn't touch her. He kept both hands where she could see them, low and open, the way you'd stand in front of a spooked animal. "I need you to actually look at me and hear this, because I'm only going to say it once, and I need you to have it forever. All right?" She looked. Her chest was rising and falling too fast. Somewhere behind the glass, the band was playing something with a trumpet in it, muffled and far away from another world entirely. "Wanting you was never the problem," Daniel said. "I want to be real clear about that first, because I think if I'm not, you're gonna walk away from this balcony and tell yourself a story that isn't true. So here's the true one. A second ago, when you had your hand in my shirt, every part of me that's still a man wanted to lean down. I'm 38 years old, and I've been alone 3 years, and you're the most alive thing I've stood next to in all that time, and I wanted to. So don't you dare tell yourself I didn't want you. That's a lie, and I don't let people carry lies out of conversations with me if I can help it." Victoria's eyes filled. "Then why—" "Because you're not the one deciding this right now. I'm standing right here." "You're standing right here," Daniel agreed. "And you're hurting and you're exhausted, and you've had more champagne tonight than you can count. You told me that yourself, ma'am. I've lost count, which is not like me. And about an hour ago, you told me the most frightened you've been in 7 years is standing next to me. That's a lot of things happening to one person at one time. And when all those things are happening at once, the person that leans in to kiss somebody that's not you. That's the champagne and the grief and the fear and the 7 years of nobody sitting with you, all reaching for the nearest warm thing at the same time." He shook his head slowly. "And I won't be the nearest warm thing, Victoria. Not to you. You deserve to be chosen, not grabbed at in the dark by a drowning woman who'll wonder in the morning if she meant it. And you would wonder, you know you would." She opened her mouth to argue. She was Victoria Reynolds. She argued for a living. She talked hostile boards into submission and stared down men who ran countries, and she had 100 sharp things ready to throw at him. And not one of them would come out. Because every single one of them, she realized, would be a lie. And this was the one man in 7 years she couldn't lie to, because he'd already seen straight through her once tonight, and she had no idea how to put the glass back up in front of somebody who'd already looked through it. "You don't get to decide what I feel," she said finally, but it came out weak. "You're right, I don't." Daniel nodded. "I'm not deciding what you feel. I believe you feel it, I do. I'm not calling you a liar. I'm saying you can't trust what you feel right now because you're not standing on solid ground. There's a difference between a feeling being real and a feeling being clear. Yours might be real, But it sure as anything isn't clear. Not tonight. Not with the count you lost. He paused. And I care too much about the answer to accept it before it's clear. Care too much. She laughed, and it was jagged. You've known me 4 hours. I've known you 4 hours, Daniel said, and I know more true things about you than people who've known you 4 years. Because for 4 hours you told me the truth, and nobody in your life lets you do that. So don't tell me 4 hours doesn't count. 4 honest hours is worth 10 years of the other kind. He took a slow breath. And I'll tell you exactly how much I care, since you're throwing the hours in my face. I care enough to say no to the one thing I want, because saying yes would take something from you that you can't get back, the knowing. The being sure. If I kiss you tonight, you will never for the rest of your life be 100% sure it was your choice. And I'd rather want you for the rest of my life and never touch you than take that from you. That's how much. Victoria turned away from him. She gripped the stone railing with both hands and looked out at the black water, and his jacket slipped a little on her shoulders, and she caught it, pulled it tight, and Daniel let her have the silence. He'd said his piece. He wasn't going to fill the quiet with more words. His mama used to say, the truth doesn't need help, you say it once plainly, and then you get out of its way and let it do its work. For a long time the only sound was the water and the far-off trumpet. Do you know, Victoria said at last, not turning around, what happens when I say no to a man? Tell me. Nothing. That's what happens. Nothing. Because I never have to. Nobody puts me in a position where I get to say no because they're all too busy trying to figure out how to get a yes out of me that they can use. I say no to deals. I say no to numbers. I have never once in my adult life had a man care enough about my no to give me one of his own. Her voice was strange, wondering, almost frightened. You just said no to me. And you did it to protect me. From myself. She finally turned around, and her makeup was ruined. And she didn't care, and she looked at him like he was something she couldn't quite believe was standing in front of her. Do you have any idea how rare you are? Do you understand that in my entire world, a world of 1,100 employees, and God knows how many so-called friends there is, not one single other person who would have done what you just did? Not one. They'd have all taken the kiss, every one of them, and congratulated themselves for it. That doesn't make me rare, ma'am. That makes them cheap. It makes you rare, she insisted, and something fierce came into her voice. Stop doing that. Stop making it small. You keep taking every good thing about yourself and shrinking it down. I move boxes. It's just manners that makes them cheap. Just once, take the compliment. You did something extraordinary. Say thank you. Daniel looked at her for a moment, and then quietly, he did what she asked. Thank you, he said. And Victoria Reynolds burst into tears. Not the elegant, controlled leaking of before. This was the real thing, the thing she hadn't done in 7 years. The ugly heaving kind that comes up from the floor of a person, and she pressed both hands over her face, and her shoulders shook, and Daniel's jacket slid off one of them, and he stepped in carefully, gently, and he didn't grab her, and he didn't hold her the way a man holds a woman he wants. He put one arm around her shoulders, the way you'd steady someone at a funeral, the way his friend had steadied him 3 years ago, asking for nothing, and he let her cry into the front of the shirt she'd had her fist in a few minutes before. I'm sorry, she said into his chest. I don't do this. I don't. You keep saying that. I don't do this. Maybe it's time you did. 7 years is a long time to hold your breath. Why are you being so, she hiccuped, so decent? It's infuriating. Do you understand that you're the most infuriating man I've ever met? You won't take anything you won't want. Anything you say no to me. And you do it all so kindly that I can't even be angry. I can only stand here and fall apart on your uniform. It's a shirt, ma'am. It washes. It's not about the shirt, Daniel. I know it's not about the shirt. He almost smiled. I know. She cried for a while. He let her. And slowly it wound down the way weather does, and she pulled back and wiped her face with the heels of her hands and let out a long, shaky breath, and she looked 10 years younger and infinitely more tired and more real than she had all night. I'm going to remember this, she said. In the morning, when I'm sober. I want you to know that. I'm not so far gone that I won't remember. I'll remember every word you said. Good. Daniel said. Then here's the last one, and I want it to be the one you remember most. He waited until she was looking at him, really looking so it would land where it needed to. If you wake up tomorrow completely sober, no champagne feet on solid ground machine running full blast, and you feed me into it, and it still comes back the same. If you still feel in the clear light of day some part of what you're feeling right now, then I want to know, you understand me. Not tonight, tomorrow, or the day after, or next week, whenever it's clear. If it's still there when it's clear, you find me and you tell me, and I will listen to every word, and I will believe you, and we will figure out what in the world two people like us are supposed to do about it. He held her eyes. But I will not ever take something from you when you're not fully yourself. Not a kiss, not anything. That's not love, Victoria. That's just theft with the lights turned down. And you've had enough taken from you. Victoria stared at him, and something moved across her face. Wonder and grief, and the first thing that might have been hope in a very long time all at once. You'd really do that, she whispered. You'd really let me walk off this balcony and get in your truck and drive 300 miles back to being nobody and just wait? Not knowing if I'd ever call. On the chance that a sober version of me might feel the same. Yes. Why? Because that's what she'd be worth, Daniel said simply. The sober one, the real one, the one who chose it clear-eyed instead of grabbing for it in the dark. He shrugged, and there was something almost helpless in it, the first crack in his own armor she'd seen all night. I'd wait a long time for that one, Victoria. Longer than's probably smart. My daughter would tell you it's my worst quality right after the not lying. I don't give up on people I've decided are worth it. I just don't. Sarah used to say I was the most stubborn, hopeful fool she ever met, and she said it like it was a bad thing, but I noticed she married me anyway. And Victoria laughed through the tears, a real broken laugh, and she reached up and very softly, without any champagne behind it. Now, just gratitude. She pressed her palm flat against his cheek, the way he imagined his daughter must, and she held it there for a moment. Daniel Carter, she said. Beaufort, seasick, the most stubborn, hopeful fool. That's me, ma'am. You're going to be very hard to forget. I'm counting on it, he said. Otherwise you won't call. Yeah. She took his jacket off her shoulders then, and held it out to him, and he took it, and for a second both their hands were on it, and neither let go. You should go, she said. Your daughter, the brakes, nobody in Beaufort. You gonna be all right getting home? I have a driver and a suite upstairs, and about 4 assistants who'll descend on me the second I walk back through those doors. She smiled ruefully. I'll be surrounded again inside of 90 seconds. Isn't that something? Loneliest surrounded person in South Carolina. You don't have to be. Daniel shrugged the jacket back on, and the loss of its warmth made her hug her own arms. That's the whole thing I've been trying to say all night, ma'am. You built the surrounded and alone. You can unbuild it. It's a gate, not a wall. You just have to decide the water's worth it. And if I sink, then you find out who stays. He looked at her steadily. That's the only way you ever find out, Victoria. You can't test who'll stay in the storm by staying in the harbor. At some point, you have to let a little water in and see whose hand's still there when it gets high. Robert let go. Sarah's whole life was staying. There's both kinds out there. You just got real unlucky with the first one, and it scared you off the ocean entirely. He paused at the balcony door, his hand on the frame. But there's people who stay. I promise you that. I've met 'em. I've been saved by 'em. Don't let one fast man convince you the whole species runs. Victoria didn't answer right away. She was memorizing him. She'd told him she would, and she meant it. The uniform and the steady eyes, and the way he stood easy and certain. A man who knew exactly who he was, and had made his peace with it. Can I ask you one more thing, she said, before you turn into a pumpkin? Ask me anything. Doesn't mean I'll answer. There it is again. She almost smiled. Just this, tonight. If I hadn't been the CEO, if I'd been a schoolteacher or a nurse like your Sarah, or a nobody in a cheap dress at that same bar, would you have sat down anyway? Daniel looked at her like it was the easiest question in the world. Ma'am, I didn't know you were the CEO, he said. For the first 2 hours I thought you might be a movie star. Then I gave up guessing. I sat down because you were drowning in a green dress. That's the only fact I had. Everything I said to you tonight, I said to a woman I thought was maybe nobody. The $11 billion, I still don't hardly believe it. Honestly, it doesn't compute that came later, and it didn't change one word. He shook his head. So yes, cheap dress, nice dress, movie star school teacher, don't matter to me even a little. I'd have sat down. I sat down for the drowning, not the dress. And that, no more than the truth about wanting her more than any of it. That was the thing that finally completely undid the last knot in Victoria Reynolds. Because it meant that every good thing that had happened on this balcony would have happened to any version of her at all. It wasn't for the money. It couldn't have been for the money. He hadn't even believed the money was real. For the first time in 7 years, a man had been kind to her, the actual her, the drowning in a green dress her. And there was no possible angle because he hadn't known there was anything to angle for. The machine had nothing to say. The machine was silent. And in the silence, for the first time in 7 years, Victoria Reynolds heard her own heart instead. "Go home, Daniel," she said softly. "Go pack a triangle sandwich. Go braid some crooked hair. Go be the father your Sarah would want you out being." "Yes, ma'am." "And Daniel." He stopped half through the door. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the no, for treating me like I was worth a no. Nobody ever has before. I didn't know how much I needed somebody to." Her voice caught. "I'll remember. I promise I'll remember. And I don't break promises either. I learned that the hard way from a man who broke one on me with a suitcase in his hand. So when I say I'll remember, I'll remember." Daniel nodded once the way soldiers do when words have run out, but something's been settled. "I'll be in Beaufort," he said. "Same phone, same truck if the brakes hold. Not going anywhere." A pause. "That's the other thing about me, ma'am. I stay put. Somebody wants to find me, I'm not hard to find. I'm the guy who's still exactly where you left him." And then he was gone back through the glass into the light and the noise. And Victoria Reynolds stood alone on the balcony over the black water, with the smell of cedar still on her shoulders, where his jacket had been, and she did not for once feel lonely in it. She felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years, and didn't have a word for yet, and it terrified her, and she let it terrify her, and she didn't reach for a glass to make it stop. He drove through the night with the windows down to stay awake, and he did not let himself think too hard about her because that way lay a kind of hoping he couldn't afford. A man like him did not build his life around a maybe from a billionaire. He'd said what he meant on that balcony, "If it's clear, find me," and then he'd done the only sane thing a poor man can do with an impossible night, which is fold it up small and put it away, and go back to the life that actually needed him. He got to Ruth's a little after dawn. Lily was already up because Lily was always already up, and she came barreling out the front door in her pajamas before he'd even shut the truck door. "Daddy." "Hey, baby." He caught her, swung her up, and God, the weight of her in his arms, the realness of her, put the whole strange glittering night into its proper size in about half a second. This was the thing. Everything else was weather. "You be good for Grandma." "I was mostly good." "That's my girl." She pulled back and studied his face the way she did the way her mother used to missing nothing. "Did you have fun?" "You look funny." "I look funny how?" "Like you're thinking about something." 7 years old, and she could read him like Victoria read a boardroom. Is it a good something or a bad something? Daniel considered that his daughter's arms around his neck and the morning coming up pink over Ruth's azaleas. "I don't know yet, Lilybug," he said honestly. "I met somebody, a lady. She was real sad and I tried to help her feel less sad. And I don't know if I'll ever see her again." Lily frowned, working through this with total seriousness. "Was she nice?" "I think underneath she's about the nicest person nobody ever let be nice. Does that make sense?" "No," said Lily. "Yeah?" Daniel laughed. "Me neither. Come on. Let's make cupcakes. We never did get to, did we?" And something went tight in his throat as he said it, because they'd never gotten to, because of the cake mix, because of the icy road, because of the okay. And Lily didn't know that, and never would if he could help it. And he carried his daughter inside, and made cupcakes, and did not check his phone, because a man does not build his life around a maybe. 300 miles away, Victoria Reynolds woke at 11 in the morning in a suite at the Charleston place with a champagne headache and a memory that hadn't burned off with the alcohol, the way she'd half hoped and half feared it would. She lay in the enormous white bed and stared at the ceiling and ran him through the machine. What did he want? Nothing. The machine returned nothing. She fed it every moment, the shrimp, the ma'am, the jacket, the no, the if it's clear. Find me in the machine which had kept her alive and armored for 7 years, which had never once come back empty, returned nothing, nothing, nothing. And she understood lying there that this was the whole test. Last night drunk she'd reached for him. This morning, sober feet on solid ground headache and all the machine running full blast the way he'd said it would. The question was whether the thing was still there. It was still there. It wasn't the champagne. The champagne was gone, and it was still there. It wasn't the loneliness of the room, because she'd been lonely in 1,000 rooms and never felt this. It was the man. The specific, stubborn, hopeful, infuriating, decent man who had wanted her and said no anyway to protect a clarity she hadn't even known she had a right to. Victoria Reynolds sat up in bed. She picked up her phone. She had 41 unread messages from assistants and board members and people who wanted things 41, little Charleses stacked up overnight, and she ignored every one of them. She'd gotten his last name from Marcus. At some point she was Victoria Reynolds. She could find out anything about anyone, and she realized, more than enough resources to locate one Navy logistics officer in Beaufort, South Carolina, by dinner time. She held the phone against her chest for a moment. He's the guy who's still exactly where you left him. And Victoria Reynolds, who had not needed anyone in 7 years, who had built a company on top of a hole and called it a foundation, who had been told her whole life that the gate was a wall. She took a breath, and she made a decision, clear-eyed and sober in the light of day. She was going to let a little water in. She was going to find out who stayed. She didn't call. That was the thing that surprised her about herself, sitting in the back of the car 3 days later, with his address in her phone, and Charleston shrinking behind her. Calling would have been easy. Calling was what she did. She picked up a phone, and things happened. Doors opened. People jumped. But a call could be run through his machine the same way she ran everything through hers. A call from a billionaire was a summons, and she didn't want to summon Daniel Carter. She'd spent enough of her life summoning people. She wanted to show up small and unannounced and on his ground and see what happened when Victoria Reynolds walked into a life that had absolutely no use for her money. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" Her driver caught her eyes in the mirror. His name was Errol, and he'd been with her 9 years, and he was the closest thing she had to a friend, which told you everything about her life. "Beaufort's an hour and change, and you cleared your whole afternoon. You never clear your whole afternoon." "I know." "The Nakamura calls at 4. Push it." "You've never pushed Nakamura." "Then it'll be good for him," Victoria said. "Build character. Drive Errol." But when they were 20 minutes out, her nerves started to go. This was insane. She was a grown woman, a serious woman, driving to a stranger's town on the strength of one drunken night and a sober morning's certainty. And what exactly was she planning to do? Knock on his door. Ambush him. "Hi, remember me, the crying billionaire from the balcony. I ran you through my machine and you came back clean. So here I am." She pressed her cold hands to her cheeks. She'd faced down men who tried to take her company and never felt her pulse do this. "Errol, pull over." "Ma'am." "Pull over. I need a minute." He pulled into a gas station on the edge of town, and she got out and stood in the sun in a $5,000 coat next to an ice machine and a stack of firewood, and she called him after all. Because showing up unannounced was a thing you did to people who owed you an audience, and she'd decided somewhere in the last hour that Daniel Carter didn't owe her one single thing. He answered on the third ring. "Carter, it's clear," Victoria said. There was a silence, a long one. She could hear something in the background, a child's voice, a television. The small sounds of an actual life, and then a door closing, cutting them off, and Daniel's voice came back lower and careful. "Say that again." "You told me," Victoria said, and her voice was shaking, and she let it. "That if I woke up sober with my feet on the ground and the machine running, and I still felt it, I should find you and tell you and you'd believe me. Well, it's been 3 days. I've been sober for 3 days. I ran you through the machine about 400 times. She took a breath. And it's clear, Daniel. It's still there, and it's clear. And I'm at a Shell station on the edge of your town, in a coat that cost too much, feeling like a complete lunatic, because I didn't want to call you. I wanted to show up. And then I got 20 minutes out, and realized showing up unannounced is a thing I do to people who work for me. And you don't work for me, so. She laughed, wet and terrified. So I'm calling, from a gas station, like a lunatic. Hi. The silence on the other end lasted so long she thought the call had dropped. Daniel. I'm here. His voice was strange. Give me a second. I'm recalibrating my whole afternoon, ma'am. You can say no. If too much time passed or you thought about it and it doesn't make sense, a Navy officer and a you can say no. You taught me how? I'll survive a no. You showed me a no can be a kind thing. I'm not saying no. Another pause. I'm trying to figure out how to tell my 7-year-old that the sad lady from the wedding is at a Shell station. He met her at a diner. Neutral ground, not his house, not her hotel. A booth in a place that smelled like coffee and bacon grease where nobody knew either of them, and a waitress named Deb called them both Hun, and never once looked at Victoria like she was worth $11 billion, because Deb had no idea and wouldn't have cared. Victoria found she could breathe in there. It was the opposite of every room she'd spent 7 years in. He came in still in his work uniform, and he slid into the booth across from her, and for a second, neither of them knew what to do with their hands or their faces. Hi, Victoria said. Hi. He almost smiled. You look terrified. I am terrified. I don't do this. I keep telling you that. You keep doing it anyway. For somebody who doesn't do this, you drove an hour to a gas station. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle, that same gesture from the wedding. So, it's clear. It's clear. Tell me what clear feels like. In the daylight, sober. I want to hear it. Not because I doubt you, because I want to know it's the real thing, and not just you being brave, which you are, which is its own kind of trap. He looked at her steadily. Bravery can feel a lot like a feeling. Tell me it's the feeling. And Victoria Reynolds, who gave presentations to rooms full of the most powerful people in the world, without notes, sat in a vinyl booth and tried to find the words for something she'd never had words for. It feels, she said slowly, like the machine turned off. That's the only way I can describe it. My whole life there's this thing running in the back of my head. What does this cost? What's the angle? Who's going to leave? Protect the position, and it never stops. Daniel. It has not stopped in 7 years. It didn't even stop at my own mother's funeral. I stood at the grave, calculating who in the crowd would try to use the moment to get a meeting. Her voice cracked. And on that balcony, and every time I've thought about you since, it just goes quiet. For the first time in 7 years, there's quiet in there. And I didn't know how loud it was until it stopped. I didn't know I'd been screaming at myself for 7 years until somebody turned it off. She wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. That's clear. That's what clear feels like. It feels like quiet. And I would do almost anything to keep it quiet, and that scares me more than any business decision I've ever made, because it means I need something, and I swore I'd never need anything again. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and this time there was no champagne, and no balcony, and no drowning, just a diner, and daylight, and a choice made clear-eyed by 2 sober adults. Okay, he said softly. Okay, I believe you. That's what I promised. If it was clear, I'd believe you. It's clear. I believe you. He squeezed her hand. So now we figure out what 2 people like us do about it. And I'll tell you right now, Victoria, it's not simple, and I'm not going to pretend it is, because pretending's a lie and I don't lie. There's about 100 reasons this shouldn't work. Name them. All right. He counted on his free hand. 1, you're worth $11 billion, and I've got a truck with bad brakes. That's not a small gap, ma'am. That's a canyon, and canyons like that break people even when everybody means well. 2, you live in a world of jets and boardrooms, and I live in a world of duty rosters and PTA meetings, and I am not leaving Beaufort because my daughter's whole life is here. her school, and her grandma, and her mother's grave, and I will not uproot a grieving child for anybody, not even you. 3. And here his voice changed, got heavier. 3. And this is the big one. I've got a little girl who lost her mother 3 years ago, and she has never once seen me look at another woman. And if I let you into her life and it falls apart, it's not me that pays for it. It's her. She's already buried one person she loved. I will walk away from the best thing that ever happened to me before I let her bury a second. Victoria absorbed that. It landed in her chest like a stone, but it was the right kind of stone, the kind that told her exactly who she was dealing with. A man whose first, second, and third thought was his child. That's not a reason it won't work, she said quietly. That's a reason it has to work slowly. Those are different. Daniel looked at her. You said that at the wedding, Victoria went on, about me. Broken and guarded are different. A wall and a gate are different. You keep teaching me to hear the difference between two things that sound the same. So let me say it back to you. Won't work and has to go slow are different. You just gave me 3 reasons to be careful. You didn't give me 1 reason to stop. She turned her hand over under his, so their palms met. So let's be careful, Daniel. God knows I'm the most careful person alive. Let's go so slowly it drives us both insane. Let's protect that little girl like she's the crown jewels, because from what you've told me she is. But don't sit here and call caution a canyon. I've built a career on the difference between a real obstacle and a scary-looking one. This one's scary-looking. It's not real, not if we're smart. And so they were careful. It started with phone calls. He'd call her at 9 after Lily was asleep, and they'd talk for an hour sometimes too, about nothing and everything. His day, moving cargo. Her day, moving money. The strange symmetry of it. She learned the rhythm of his life, the 5 a.m. lunches, and the crooked braids, and the way he read Lily a chapter every single night, no matter how tired he was, because Sarah used to, and it was one of the things he could keep. He learned the shape of her days, the loneliness dressed up as importance, the boardrooms full of Charleses. You know what I did today, she told him one night 3 weeks in. I fired a man for lying to me about the Q3 numbers. And a month ago, I'd have felt nothing, just cold, efficient. And today I fired him, and then I went to my office and I felt bad about it. Not that he lied, he did lie, he deserved it. But bad that it had come to that bad for his family. I actually thought about his family. Daniel and I have never once in my life thought about somebody's family when I fired them. She sounded almost frightened. What are you doing to me? I'm getting soft. I can't afford to get soft. Soft gets you left with a suitcase. You're not getting soft, Daniel said. You're getting whole. There's a difference. There's always a difference with you. That's because most things people are scared of are just 2 things that sound alike. Soft and whole sound alike. They're not. Soft is when you can't take the hit. Whole is when you can take the hit and still feel the family. You're not losing your edge, Victoria. You're just growing back the part of you Robert cut off. That's not soft. That's healing. It only feels like soft because you've never done it before. She was quiet a long time. How do you always know the exact thing to say? I don't. You just don't hear the times I get it wrong because I hang up and think of the right thing an hour later, same as everybody. But it wasn't only phone calls, and it wasn't only Tinder. Because Victoria Reynolds had built a fortress for a reason, and fortresses don't come down without a fight. And there were nights the old policy rose up in her like a fever, and she picked fights. She didn't mean said cold things, tried to make him into a Charles or a Robert before he could become one on his own. The worst of it came about 6 weeks in. She'd had a brutal day. A board that was circling her, an activist investor, buying up shares and whispering that maybe Reynolds Global had gotten too dependent on one woman. Maybe it was time for adult supervision. The oldest, ugliest song they sang about her, the She's Emotional, She's Unpredictable song. And she came home to her enormous empty apartment, and she called Daniel, and before he could even say hello, she said the cruelest thing she could think of. This is a fantasy, she said. You know that, right? This whole thing? It's a nice story I tell myself at night to feel less alone. But we both know a Navy officer and a billionaire is a headline, not a life. So maybe we should stop before it gets complicated. Before it gets in the papers. Before it costs either of us anything real. Silence on the line. Say something, she snapped. What do you want me to say, Victoria? I want you to fight, damn it. It came out of her before she could stop it, raw and cracked. I want you to argue. I want you to be hurt. I don't know what I want. Yes, you do, Daniel said quietly. You want me to leave, right now, tonight. You had a bad day, and the board's coming for you, and you feel weak. And the second you feel weak, the policy kicks in. Need nothing, and no one can leave you. So you're trying to make me leave on your schedule on your terms, so that when it happens, it doesn't count as being left. You're trying to fire me before I can quit. I watched you do it to a man at the wedding. Charles. Email my office. Cold, fast, clean. You're doing it to me right now. His voice was gentle, and it was immovable both at once. And I'm not going to help you. Going to help. Victoria's breath caught. I'm not going anywhere, Daniel said. You can be as cruel as you want. You can call this a fantasy, a headline, a nice story. You can push and push. And I'm still going to be here at the end of it in Beaufort, same phone, same truck. Because I told you at the wedding, I'm the guy who stays put. And the whole point of me, Victoria, the entire point, is that I'm going to be the first person in your life who doesn't leave when you make it hard. So make it hard. Get it out of your system. And when you're done, I'll still be on the line. A pause. The ship's taking on water, and you're looking around to see whose hand's still there. It's still here. It's not going anywhere. That's the answer. Now stop testing the water and just tell me about your day for real this time. And Victoria Reynolds sat down on the floor of her enormous empty apartment, with her back against the cold marble island, and she cried into the phone, and Daniel stayed on the line, and he didn't leave, and something in her that had been clenched for 7 years began very slowly to unclench. The board's trying to push me out, she whispered when she could talk. Okay, now we're talking. Tell me the real thing. All of it. And she did. He never once offered to fix it. That was the thing she couldn't get over. Any other man in her life, you handed them a problem, and they immediately started trying to solve it, to be the hero, to make themselves necessary. Daniel just listened and asked questions and let her think out loud, and at the end he said, "Sounds like you already know what you're going to do. You just needed to say it to somebody who doesn't want your job." That's it. That's exactly it. Everyone who advises me wants something. My lawyers, my bankers, my board, every piece of advice comes with an angle. You're the only person I can think out loud in front of. That's because I genuinely do not care about Reynolds Global Technologies, ma'am. I care whether you slept. Whole different thing. She fought the board, and she won the way she always won, but this time she didn't come home to an empty apartment and a silent scream. This time she came home and called Beaufort and told a man who didn't care about her company that she'd saved it anyway, and he said, "Good. Now did you eat?" And she laughed until she cried, because in her entire life, at the summit of her greatest professional victory, the only person who asked if she'd eaten was a logistics officer 300 miles away who thought her company was boring. 2 months in, she did something she'd never done. She took herself off anything to do with him professionally. Not that there was much, but Reynolds Global had defense logistics contracts, and there were worlds where their paths could have crossed on paper, and she went to her general counsel and had walls built. Firewalls, recusals, a paper fortress of the opposite kind than she was used to, all designed to guarantee one thing, that whatever happened between her and Daniel Carter, no one could ever say she'd used her power on him, and more importantly, that he could never wonder it either. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said when she told him. "Yes, I did. You said it yourself at the wedding. You'll never be sure it was your choice if I'm holding something over you." Well, I'm not going to hold anything over you. Not a contract, not a favor, not a dime. If this works, it works because 2 free people chose it, not because the billionaire arranged it. I want you to be as free to walk away from me as I am learning to be free to let a little water in. She paused. I learned that from you. The whole thing. That you can't take something from someone who isn't fully free to say no. So I'm making sure you're free. That's my version of the balcony, Daniel. That's me saying no to my own power the way you said no to me. There was a long silence on the line. "Sarah would have liked you," Daniel said finally, and his voice was rough. She'd have liked you a lot. That's the highest thing I've got to give, ma'am, and I don't give it easy, so there it is. And then 3 months in, on a phone call at 9:15 at night, a small voice interrupted them. "Daddy, who are you talking to every night?" Daniel's hand went over the phone, but not fast enough, and Victoria heard it. The child's voice, sleepy and curious, and then Daniel's low and careful, and then a silence. And then Daniel came back on the line, and his voice had changed. "She's awake," he said. "She wants to know who I talk to every night. She's noticed. Kids notice everything." A breath. "I've been protecting this Victoria. Keeping her out of it, keeping it slow exactly like we said. But she's asking. And I don't lie to my daughter. It's the one rule I've never broken. So I've got a choice to make, and it's the biggest one. And I need you to understand what it means before I make it. Tell me, if I tell her about you, if I let her know you exist, then you're not just mine to protect anymore. You're hers to lose, and she's already lost one. So I need to ask you something, and I need the most honest answer you've ever given anybody in your life, more honest than the balcony, more honest than the diner. Because a grown woman can survive me being wrong about her. A 7-year-old can't. Ask me." Daniel took a breath, and 300 miles away on the floor of an apartment that didn't feel empty anymore, Victoria Reynolds gripped the phone with both hands. "Are you going to stay?" Daniel asked. "Not because it's easy. Not because it stays quiet in your head. When it gets hard, and it will. Victoria, it will get hard, the board, and the papers, and the canyon, and all of it. When it gets hard, and every instinct you've got is screaming at you to run before you get left. Are you going to stay?" His voice was steady, and it was the most vulnerable she'd ever heard it. "Because if you tell my daughter you're not going anywhere, then you are not allowed to go anywhere. Ever. That's the deal. She doesn't get to lose another one. So be sure. Be so sure. Are you going to stay?" And Victoria Reynolds, who had spent 7 years making certain she never needed a single soul, who had built a company on top of a hole, and called it a foundation, who had been taught by the cruelest lesson of her life, that the only way to survive was to leave. First. Victoria Reynolds closed her eyes, and for once, the machine was silent, and in the silence, she heard the truest thing she had. "Put her on," she said. "Let me tell her myself." "Are you sure?" Daniel said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "Once she hears your voice, once you're real to her, there's no undoing it. I need you to be sure." "Put her on, Daniel." There was a rustle, a muffled exchange, a whispered "Here, baby, somebody wants to say hi," and then a small, cautious, wide-awake voice came onto the line. "Hello." And Victoria Reynolds, who had negotiated with heads of state, who had stared down men trying to strip her company for parts, who did not get nervous, felt her heart climb straight up into her throat. "Hi, Lily," she said. "My name's Victoria." A pause. The careful evaluation of a 7-year-old. "You're the lady my daddy talks to at night." "I am." "Every night." "Just about every night," Victoria admitted. "For a long time." There was a note of accusation in it, gentle but real. "I could hear him laughing. My daddy doesn't laugh at night. He laughs in the daytime sometimes, but not at night. At night, he's usually tired." A beat. "But he laughs when he talks to you. I heard it through the wall." Victoria pressed the phone hard against her ear. 300 miles away, Daniel was standing in a hallway trying not to make a sound. "Does that bother you?" Victoria asked. "That he laughs at night now?" Lily thought about it with the total seriousness she brought to everything. "No," she decided. "I like it. It's a good sound." And then, with the devastating directness that only children have, the question that would sit in Victoria's chest for the rest of her life. "Are you the lady who makes my dad smile?" Victoria's eyes flooded. She'd built an empire. She'd been on the cover of magazines under the word ICE. And a 7-year-old had just in 8 words walked straight through every wall she had ever built and touched the exact center of her. "I try to be," she managed. "I try really hard to be Lily. Your dad makes me smile too. He's the first person in a very long time who did." "Why was you sad?" "I was very sad," Victoria said. "For a long time. Longer than you've been alive." "That's a super long time." "It is. It's a super long time." "What made you sad?" And Victoria, who lied for a living, in the sense that every executive does who managed and spun and controlled every word that left her mouth found. She could not do anything but tell this child the plain truth. Because Daniel didn't lie to his daughter, and she was not going to be the one who started. "Somebody I loved left me," she said simply. "A long time ago, and it made me so scared of getting left again that I stopped letting anybody get close. I built a big wall around myself so nobody could ever hurt me. And the wall worked. Nobody could hurt me." Her voice cracked. "But nobody could reach me either. And it turns out that's just as bad, Lily. Maybe worse." There was a silence on the line, and Victoria was afraid she'd said too much, gone too deep, frightened the child. And then Lily said something that stopped her heart. "I built a wall too." "You did, after my mommy went to heaven." The small voice was matter-of-fact, in the way children are about the enormous things. "I didn't want to love anybody new because then they could go to heaven too, and it hurts too much. So I only loved Daddy and Grandma and Admiral. Admiral's my dolphin. He can't go to heaven because he's already got stuffing instead of a heart, so he's safe." A pause. "But Daddy says a wall keeps out the bad stuff and the good stuff. He says you have to leave a gate. Did your wall have a gate?" Victoria was crying now, silently, the phone shaking in her hand. "No, baby," she whispered. "My wall didn't have a gate. For 7 years it didn't have a gate. Your daddy's the one who taught me it could be a gate instead of a wall. He taught me that at a wedding. He's very smart about walls, your dad." "I know," said Lily with total confidence. "He's smart about everything. He can braid hair even though he's a boy." A yawn. "Victoria." "Yes, Lily. Are you going to come visit Daddy? Talks to you every night, but I never seen you. I want to see if you're real." And through the wall, Victoria heard Daniel make a sound, a small, broken, helpless sound, a father hearing his child open a door he'd been guarding with his life, and she knew that this right here was the whole thing, the entire test, everything the balcony had been protecting. "Would that be okay with you?" Victoria asked. "If I came to visit, I don't want to come if you don't want me to. It's your house and your daddy, and I would only come if you said yes." There was a pause while a 7-year-old made one of the most important decisions of 2 adults' lives. "Yeah," Lily said. "You can come. But you have to meet Admiral. And if Admiral doesn't like you, then you can't stay. That's the rule." "That's a fair rule," Victoria said. "I accept your rule. I'll do my very best to make a good impression on Admiral." "Okay. Here's Daddy. Night, Victoria." "Good night, Lily." There was a rustle, and then Daniel came back on the line, and for a long moment, neither of them could say anything at all. She could hear him breathing. She could hear him getting himself back under control the way she'd learned he did, the way she now did too. "Well," Daniel said, finally thick, "you've got to get past Admiral now. He's a tough critic. Turned down a preschool teacher and both of Lily's aunts." Victoria laughed, wet and helpless. "I negotiate for a living, Daniel. I'll bring him a fish. He's a dolphin. He'd want a fish. That's actually smart." A pause, and his voice went soft and serious. "She opened the door, Victoria. My kid. She opened it herself. I've been standing in front of that door for 3 years with my whole body keeping the world out, and she just walked up and opened it for you. She doesn't do that. She hasn't done that for anybody." He let out a breath that shook. "I think she's been waiting for me to be happy. I think she's been carrying that. 7 years old and carrying her daddy's loneliness around like it was her job to fix it." "Kids notice everything," Victoria said. "You told me that." "Yeah, they do." His voice broke a little. When can I come, Daniel? I can push every meeting I have. I'm Victoria Reynolds. I can be there Saturday." "Then come Saturday," Daniel said. "Come meet my girl. Come meet the dolphin. Come see the crooked braids and the triangle sandwiches. Come see the whole small ordinary life, ma'am. And let's find out if the woman worth $11 billion can be happy in a 2-bedroom house in Beaufort that smells like pancakes." A pause. "Because that's the real test. Not the balcony, not the board, this. Whether the biggest life in America can fit itself into the smallest one and not feel like it lost something." "Daniel," Victoria said, "I have never in my life felt like I had something to lose until I met a man who owned almost nothing. Do you understand what a gift that is? You made me rich. The actual kind. The kind I couldn't buy. Her voice steadied into something certain. I'll be there Saturday, and I'm going to charm the hell out of that dolphin. She came Saturday. She left the car and the driver and the coat that cost too much. She drove herself in a rental in jeans because she'd asked Daniel what to wear, and he'd laughed and said Lily's making mud pies in the backyard, so nothing you'd cry over, and she'd stood in her enormous closet full of armor and picked the plainest thing she owned and felt for the first time in years, like she was putting on her real skin instead of a costume. Lily was waiting on the porch when the rental pulled up. She had a dolphin under one arm and mud on both knees, and an expression of intense, ferocious evaluation. And Victoria Reynolds, who had walked into rooms full of the most powerful people alive, without her pulse changing, parked the car and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel, more nervous than she had ever been for anything. This is the one that matters, she thought. All of it. The company, the billions, the wall, the balcony. None of it matters if I fail this one. This little girl is the whole test. She got out of the car. Are you Victoria? Lily demanded from the porch. I am. Are you Lily? Yeah, this is Admiral. She held up the dolphin worn soft and gray with love. He's gonna decide. Victoria walked up to the porch and crouched down to the child's level, the way she never crouched for anyone, and she looked the dolphin very seriously in its plastic eyes. And then she looked at Lily. Before Admiral decides, Victoria said, I brought him something, because your dad told me he's a tough critic, and I don't come to important meetings unprepared. And she reached into her bag and pulled out a small stuffed fish, soft and blue, that she had gone to 4 stores to find because it had to be exactly right, and she held it out. It's for Admiral. So he has something to eat that isn't imaginary. I thought a dolphin who's in charge of the whole ocean should have a real fish, not a pretend one. Lily's eyes went enormous. She took the fish with the reverence of a child receiving treasure. She held it up to the dolphin's face and made the dolphin inspect it, and there was a long agonizing pause, during which 2 adults, one on the porch, one just inside the screen door where he'd been not so secretly watching, held their breath. Admiral says, Lily announced that you can stay, and Daniel Carter came out through the screen door laughing. Really laughing, the daytime kind and the nighttime kind all at once, and Victoria stood up and looked at him over his daughter's head, and neither of them had to say a single word. It was not a fairy tale because Daniel didn't believe in those, and neither anymore did Victoria. It was harder than a fairy tale, and better than one. There were fights. There was the day the story finally hit the papers. Billionaire CEO and Navy single dad. And the vultures descended, and think pieces were written about what she saw in him, and uglier ones about what he must be after. And Victoria watched Daniel read one of the worst of them, one that called him a gold digger in a uniform, and she braced for him to run, because everyone ran eventually. That was the one thing she still believed in her bones. He set the tablet down. He looked at her, and he said, You know what's funny? 6 months ago, I'd have cared what these people thought. Now I read this, and all I can think is, they don't know that you cried over a triangle sandwich. They think they're writing about a billionaire and a soldier. They don't know they're writing about 2 people who each thought they'd never get to be happy again. He slid the tablet away. Let 'em write. They can have the headline. We've got the life. And he went back to helping Lily with her spelling words, and Victoria Reynolds understood that she had at last found a man who could not be moved by the water because he'd already survived the flood. There was the harder thing, too. The thing they moved toward slowly and carefully over the better part of a year, Sarah. Because Victoria was never going to be Lily's mother, and both of them knew it, and the great trap would have been pretending otherwise. It was Lily in the end who found the shape of it Lily, who took Victoria one afternoon to the cemetery without telling Daniel, and stood in front of a grave and said, This is my mommy. Her name was Sarah. She was a nurse for sick kids, and she sang bad in the shower. And Victoria crouched down in the grass and looked at the headstone and felt no jealousy at all, only an enormous tenderness, and she said, Thank you for taking care of your daddy and Lily before I got here. I'm going to try to take good care of them too. I'll never do it as good as you, but I'll try really hard. And Lily slipped her muddy hand into Victoria's, and that was the day it truly became a family. Not on the balcony, not in the diner, but in a graveyard with a dead woman's blessing asked for and somehow given. They married in the second spring in the backyard that smelled like pancakes. Small 40 people. Marcus as best man, Deb from the diner in the third row crying into a napkin. Victoria wore a plain dress. Lily was the flower girl, and also at her own insistence the ring bearer, and also unofficially Admiral's manager, because the dolphin attended in a tiny bow tie. There were no cameras. Victoria had signed away quietly and permanently any professional entanglement that could ever have touched Daniel, so that on the day she married him, not one single person on earth could say she'd bought him, and more to the point, so that Daniel himself for the rest of his life would never once have to wonder. "I have to tell you something," she said to him under the oak tree before the vows, "and it's the most honest thing I've ever said, and I need you to have it forever the way you gave me the balcony." She took his hands. "You said no to me once, on a balcony drunk and sad, and reaching for the nearest warm thing. You were the first person in my life who wanted something and said no to it to protect me. And I have spent 2 years trying to figure out how to pay that back, and I finally understand that I can't. It's not a debt, it's a gift. You didn't take me when I wasn't myself, so I got to become myself, and then give myself freely standing right here, completely sure. You gave me the only thing money can't buy, Daniel Carter. You gave me the certainty that I chose this, that nobody chose it for me, that I'm not being taken from, I'm giving." Her voice broke. "Do you know what that's worth to a woman who spent her whole life being calculated at it's worth everything? It's worth more than the 11 billion. It's the richest I've ever been." And Daniel, who never cried, cried. "Sarah told me once," he said when he could, "that I was the most stubborn, hopeful fool she ever met, that I'd wait forever for a thing if I decided it was worth it." He looked at her steady as a lighthouse. "I waited 3 years after I lost her thinking I was done, thinking the best of my life was behind me. And then a woman was drowning at a wedding in a green dress and I sat down. Because that's just what you do. I didn't sit down for the billions. I still don't hardly believe the billions. I sat down for the drowning." His voice roughened. "And it turned out the drowning woman was the second great love of a life I thought only got one. I don't know what I did to deserve two, Victoria. Most men don't get one. But I'm not going to argue with it. I'm just going to be grateful every single day, and I'm going to stay, because staying's the only thing I was ever any good at." They said the rest of it. The ordinary vows, and Lily held the rings, and Admiral watched in his bow tie, and the oak tree dropped light down through its leaves onto 40 people who loved them. And when Daniel kissed her, finally, at last cleanly with the whole world watching, and the sun out, and nobody drunk, and nothing taken, Victoria Reynolds understood the thing he'd been trying to teach her since the first hour of the first night, that the strongest man in any room is not the one who takes what he wants. It's the one who has the courage to wait until it's freely given. Years later, and there were years, good ones, ordinary and full. A reporter finally got Victoria to sit for the interview. She'd refused 100 times, the one about how the coldest CEO in America became, in the words of her own board, somehow more ruthless in the boardroom and softer everywhere else. The reporter was young and sharp and had done her homework, and near the end, she leaned in and asked the question she'd clearly been saving. "There's a story," the reporter said, "that when you first met your husband, you were, how do I put this delicately? You'd had a bit too much to drink at a wedding, and you made a pass at him and he turned you down. Is that true? Did the great Victoria Reynolds actually get rejected by a Navy logistics officer? And Victoria Reynolds, older now, and softer and richer in every way that had turned out to matter, smiled. "It's true," she said. "Every word. I was drunk and sad, and I'd been alone for 7 years, and I reached for the first kind man I'd met in a decade, and he stopped me." She turned her wedding ring slowly on her finger, the way he turned his coffee cup. "Everyone hears that story and thinks it's about him rejecting me. It isn't. It's the opposite. It's the only time in my adult life a man refused to take something from me that I was offering because he cared more about my dignity than his own wanting. Every other person I'd ever known would have taken the kiss and called it a good night. He said no, and he said it to protect me from myself, from the version of me that wasn't really choosing." Her eyes were bright. "I'd spent my whole life being wanted for what I could give people. He was the first man who wanted me enough to not take. Do you understand the difference? It took me 34 years and a stranger on a balcony to learn that the deepest love isn't the kind that grabs, it's the kind that waits. The reporter who had come for a headline sat back with nothing to write for a moment. "So what happened?" she asked finally. After he said no, "I woke up the next morning," Victoria said, sober feet on the ground. "My whole machine running full blast, and I realized the thing I felt was still there, clear. So I drove an hour to his town, and I called him from a gas station like a lunatic, and I told him the truth. And he believed me because he'd promised he would." She smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes, the way it never used to. "And then a 7-year-old and a stuffed dolphin decided the rest of my life. And I have never, for one single day since, been lonely in a crowded room again." She stood to end the interview. At the door, the reporter turned back. "One last thing. If you could say one sentence to the woman you were that night on the balcony, the sad, drunk, walled-off version of you reaching for a stranger, what would you tell her?" Victoria Reynolds thought about it for a long moment. Somewhere in the house behind her, a man was helping a teenager with her marine biology homework, and a worn gray dolphin sat on a shelf in a place of honor. Retired now, but never thrown away. And the whole small, ordinary, enormous life she'd almost been too afraid to let herself have hummed quietly around her like something alive. "I'd tell her the wall was always a gate," she said. "She just never met anyone worth opening it for, and that he was already in the room. And that in about 4 hours a man who owned almost nothing was going to make her the richest woman alive, not by giving her anything, but by refusing to take. And I'd tell her to stop being so afraid of the water." Her voice was absolutely steady now, absolutely certain, a woman who had finally learned the one thing all her billions never taught her. Because the flood doesn't drown you. The flood is how you finally find out who stays. And somebody was always going to stay. His name was Daniel, and he was worth every single thing it cost her to walk through that gate. She never gave another interview. She never needed to. She had the life, and the life was the only answer that had ever mattered. A Navy single father who stayed put. A billionaire who finally let the water in. A little girl who opened a door her father had guarded with his whole body. And a family that began, not with a perfect moment, but with a drunken mistake that a good man was decent enough to stop. Two broken people had walked into a wedding alone. They walked out eventually as a family, and not $1 of 11 billion had anything to do with it. That was the whole truth of it. Clean and complete, the strongest thing Daniel Carter ever did was say no, and the bravest thing Victoria Reynolds ever did was believe him. And everything good in both their lives came pouring through the gate they opened between them.